Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marked with myself and pdmac. We're reading chapters 11 and 12, so obviously we're just going to jump right in. So, chapter 11, Gwen. Holy Solara, Kirith whispered. The dragon's head perked to the side, and it spotted them. Gwen expected to die. She'd heard stories of dragons breathing fire, destroying entire towns from existence. Granted, before now, she'd always assumed they were just stories, myths even, but here was one of the legendary creatures in front of her. It was 20 feet long from head to tail, and its silver scales glittered under the rays of sunlight that filtered through the trees. Gwen didn't realize she was holding her breath until her lungs started to burn. She exhaled softly, as if any sound would bring the dragon's wrath down upon them. Are you going to stare at me all day? The dragon finally asked. Its voice was deep and throaty, and the words echoed among the trees. Gwen looked at Kirith and Emil, not sure who the dragon was speaking to. The fact that it spoke at all was enough to make her question her own sanity. You there, the dragon said. Me? Gwen asked. Yes, you. Come near. I think it would be best if you did what it said, Kirith said lowly. No, Emil said. Dragons are sly, dangerous beasts. We should go. Gwen was torn on whose advice to follow until the dragon narrowed its eyes on her. She felt obligated to obey the dragon and took a few tentative steps forward. Closer than that, the dragon huffed. I'm not going to eat you. Gwen looked over her shoulder. Emil shook her head, but Kirith was motioning for her to continue. Gritting her teeth against her anxiety, Gwen closed the distance to the river and stopped when she was standing at the bank. On the other side of the river stood the dragon. She had thought the creature was massive from afar, but now that she was standing so close, it was even larger. Its scales looked smooth, and when the dragon peered down at her, Gwen saw his eyes were a brilliant shade of blue. What is your name? The dragon asked. Gwen. Her voice broke as she answered. She cursed herself in her mind. Gwen. The dragon stared at her for a long while before continuing. This river is the source of life for all of Vale. Gwen looked down at the rushing water. It flowed from the north, weaving among the trees until it reached where they stood. The ground curved in a natural arch, and the water disappeared underground. Gwen spotted a black liquid, thick and bubbly, on the archway. It was slowly dripping into the water. As the drops fell, the water turned dark and murky. What is that? Gwen asked, wrinkling her nose as a bitter smell filled the air. Poison, the dragon answered. It's fouling the river. Who would poison the river? Who indeed? Given the events that occurred today, it was probably one of the disgraced king's supporters. This is an unimaginable crime. How do you know what happened? Gwen looked up at the dragon. Haven't you heard the saying, dragons see everything? No, Gwen admitted. We do, the dragon said. Gwen thought that was nonsense, but she didn't want to argue with the dragon and risk being killed, so she changed the subject. What is your name? The dragon eyed her warily, then said, Vinya. That's a beautiful name. Thank you. Vinya preened at the compliment, standing tall and flicking her tail behind her. I can reach that stuff with a stick, Gwen offered, bending down to grab one from under a nearby tree. She walked onto the archway and held the stick out over the water, then moved it upward to catch the black liquid. As the liquid touched the stick, the wood sizzled and popped, then caught fire. Gwen jumped back a step, then hurriedly dipped the burning end into the river to kill the flames. That didn't go as planned. The poison has a bit of magic in it, Vinya said. Hold out your hand. Gwen lifted her left hand. The other one, Vinya clarified. Gwen switched hands, and Vinya peered at the rune on her skin. You have the sail rune. That can help. How? I will teach you, Vinya said. Put your hand in the water, but not near the poison. Gwen walked back to the bank and knelt beside the river, then lowered her hand into the water. It was cool against her skin and soothed the faint burning sensation that tingled around the rune. She watched Venya's reflection on the water's surface, admiring the dragon's beauty. The creature was obviously dangerous, yet Gwen was inexplicably drawn to the dragon. Channel the energy of the rune into the water and speak its name. Venya's blue eyes seemed to glow in the reflection on the water. Gwen closed her eyes and mentally visualized the green energy that pulsed within the rune. She willed the energy from herself, and glowing green tendrils snaked into the water from her palm. She opened her eyes and saw the tendrils knit themselves together, spreading through the water and obstructing the black liquid. Pain flared through Gwen's mind and hand, but she pushed through it, refusing to give in to the discomfort. The tendrils of green energy spun around a glob of poison, circling it until the blackness faded and the water was clean. Gwen watched the tendrils continue from spot to spot, clearing the river of the poison, but it was taking a toll on her. Weakness was creeping into her muscles, and her vision started to blur. Venya said something, but Gwen couldn't make out the words. She sounded far away. Gwen tried to cut the magic off, but it continued to pour from her into the water, ignoring her frail command. She started to panic and pulled her hand from the water. The green tendrils weren't phased. They continued to enter the river and destroy the poison. Gwen fell onto her back and stared up at the canopy overhead, a whirring distortion of color. She felt ill and thought she was going to vomit until darkness claimed her, sharp and sudden. When she came to, her entire body was trembling. Venya was looking down at her. Gwen didn't consider concern to be a normal emotion for a dragon, though she didn't know what normal was anymore. But she thought that's what she saw in Venya's blue gaze. "We're alive," Venya said, a statement more than a question. "I am," Gwen rasped, and forced herself into a sitting position. She looked around and noticed that Kirith and Emil were gone. "Your friends fled in fear. You shouldn't hold any ill will against them for it. Not many have seen a dragon these days." Gwen's first instinct was to be angry with them. The dragon could have eaten her or maimed her, and her allies had just left her for dead. Venya's words rang with truth, though, and Gwen dismissed her anger. "I didn't know dragons were real," Gwen admitted. Her throat was parched, and her voice sounded odd in her own ears. She looked to the river, wanting to drink of the water, but unsure if it was safe. Venya followed her gaze. "You can drink," she said. "Did we get all of the poison out?" "Most of it," Venya answered. "You pushed yourself hard, perhaps too hard. The magic could have drained your life." "But it didn't," Gwen said, then crawled to the edge of the bank. She cupped her hands and dipped them into the water and drank her fill, and turned her attention back to Venya. "What about the rest of the poison? Do you want me to try again?" "No," Venya replied. "What remains will be washed away. You have done a great service for Olivel. Not many would risk their life for a stranger, yet you risked yours for many. Perhaps there is hope after all." "Hope for what?" "For this world. The darkness of Eisenthal grows daily, and there are few who stand against it." "I'm with the rebellion," Gwen said. "We're working to remove Torian from the throne. As long as there is someone fighting against tyranny, there is always hope." Wise words from someone so young. Venya stared intently at Gwen for a moment. "Where will you go now?" "Emil and I are going to Steepcross," Gwen said. "I go to learn my true name." "The Great Library," Venya said. "I know the place, though I have not seen it in many years. The librarians are guardians of ancient tomes of power, as well as the world's history. You may be surprised at what you learn while you are there." Venya's snout flared as she sniffed the air. "I must go," she said. "I will be watching you, Gwen. When the time comes to battle Torian, know that I will go with you." Before Gwen could reply, Venya turned and vaulted herself into the air, her majestic wings carrying her into the sky. Gwen stood in place, watching until Venya's silver form was gone from her view. She left the river behind and headed back the way she had come. The barrier that protected the entrance to the river shimmered and pulsed. Gwen prepared herself as best as she could, then stepped through it. A dizzying wave of sickness washed over her, but it wasn't as bad as the first time. Her vision cleared quickly. Kirith and Emil were there waiting for her. "Are you all right?" Emil asked. "Did the dragon curse you?" "What? No," Gwen answered. "I'm fine." "You spoke to the guardian of Olivel," Kirith said, awed. "She hasn't been seen by my people for over 100 years. What did she say?" "Someone poisoned the Thaestra," Gwen said. "She helped me cleanse the water. Well, most of it. You have been highly blessed." Kirith's wonder was still etched on his face. "We need to get moving," Emil said. "If we leave now, we might reach Steepcross by tomorrow night." "Are we in a rush?" Gwen asked. "I wouldn't mind staying another night here." "As much as I would love to allow that, I'm afraid Emil is right. There are already nervous whispers among my people that you two are responsible for poisoning Thaestra. I know it's not true," Kirith hastily added, seeing Gwen's surprised expression. "I think it would be best for you to continue your journey, and I will work to quell the rumors." Gwen decided Kirith made a valid point, especially since she was eager to learn her true name. "I can understand your people's fear," she said. "It's justified, though unfounded." "Thank you," Kirith said. "I will ensure you leave well supplied." "May I see Lyra before we go?" Gwen asked. "Of course. I'll escort you there." Kirith led them back to the forest city, and they stopped at the temple. I'll wait out here, Emil said, and I shall get your supplies in order. Lyra should be inside praying to Solara. Kirith offered a bow and left. Gwen stepped inside the temple, and spotted Lyra kneeling in front of the dragon statue. She was the only one present aside from the guards outside, and Gwen waited patiently for Lyra to finish her prayer. She enjoyed the peacefulness the temple exuded, and much like the water of the Thestra, she felt renewed by it. Have you come to pray? Lyra asked as she rose to her feet. No, Gwen replied. I've come to say goodbye. Emil and I are leaving. Lyra walked along the pathway between the pews and joined Gwen at the doors. Olivel is indebted to you for rescuing Kirith from the vagabonds. There is no debt to be paid, Gwen said. I did what was right. If you say it, then it shall be so, Lyra said. Yet I have heard that you also healed the Thestra. Who told you? The Thestra did, Lyra replied. The waters are alive as you and I are, and they speak to those who listen. Gwen remembered the vision she'd had and realized that the river had spoken to her through the Sal rune. Lyra said, Olivel was indebted to her, but she felt indebted to the elves. Thank you, Gwen said, for everything. There is much more to be done if we are to defeat Torian. I will pray that Solara guides and protects you. I will see you again, Gwen said, but as the words left her mouth, they felt more like a question. The future does not reveal its secrets, but I hope we meet again. Gwen smiled and offered a bow, then left the temple. Emil was gone, and Kirith hadn't returned yet. She guessed that the two might have slipped away to enjoy each other's company again, but Emil stepped into view from the side of the temple. She hopped over a large tree root, and something shiny fell into the shrubbery. I hope you like cheese, Kirith said cheerily as he returned. His sister was with him, carrying 2 leather sacks. Your horses seem eager, too. Gwen had almost forgotten about the horses. She was glad they wouldn't have to travel on foot. While Emil talked with Kirith, Gwen walked over to where Emil had dropped something and spotted a glass vial. She picked it up and was about to tell Emil she had dropped it when she spotted what was inside. It was almost empty. There was a few drops in the bottle, and the liquid was unmistakable. She quickly stuffed the vial into her waistband and covered it with her shirt. Emil wasn't acting any differently, but Gwen now knew who had poisoned the river.
Chapter 12. Connell. Farrell stared at Brioc, waiting for the punchline. When none came, he deadpanned, You're serious. Has a heart attack, Torgwith chimed in with a snort. I know. Took me a while to get used to it. He's such a lovable oaf, but it's true. Which brings me to another point, Brioc elaborated. You may have unwittingly triggered the prophecy. What prophecy? Farrell asked, suddenly apprehensive. The eagle will bear the vipers in his claws, yet from the west a cobra will rise and strike down the eagle. How was I to know? Farrell blurted. Are you sure he's the one? Beyond all doubt, Gallaudet said, not totally convinced himself, though there was something different about Connell that made him want to believe. How is this possible? Farrell argued. He's from Hervé. I remember him telling me that. Said he spent his whole life there. He and his sister were secreted out of Havengard when they were quite young, Brioc explained, during the turmoil when Torian killed Cameron. Do you remember Torian sending messengers looking for traitors to the crown, supposedly traveling with 2 children, one a babe and the other perhaps a year older? You had just assumed the domain here. Farrell blinked at the recollection. An emissary from Torian had arrived at Rexford, demanding Gallaudet turned citizens of Isenthal who had recently entered the kingdom, especially those traveling with 2 children under the age of 2. To his credit, Gallaudet told the emissary to get the hell out of my kingdom. I do vaguely remember that, Farrell acknowledged. What Torian failed to perceive, Brioc said, was that the children were split up. Connell went to Hervé and his sister somewhere else. As time went on and his searching proved unsuccessful, he shifted his attention to his true desire, subjugating the surrounding kingdoms, elf, dwarf, and human. He has patiently gathered an army of wizards and mages to his cause. When he unleashes his forces, kingdoms will fall, one by one. Tirmana will not be spared. Brioc looked back over his shoulder, making sure the door remained closed. Turning back, he continued, However, much to his shock, he recently discovered that both children live. To Connell's good fortune, Torian never suspected that he would end up with a bunch of highwaymen. However, his agents are again looking for his brother's children. In Connell's case, Torian discovered his family in Irving. That Connell never told them where he was is the only reason he is still alive. But it didn't save my family, Connell said through clenched teeth. Briac solemnly nodded. Torian knows the prophecy. He knows Connell still lives. We believe that his sister is also alive. We have friends looking for her. That said, it is imperative that we gave Caldir support to stop Torian. Chagrined, Farrell stared at Connell. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, Connell said, placing a hand on Farrell's arm. Even I didn't know. Farrell's first instinct was to yank his arm away and castigate the offender, but he remembered he was now dealing with a potential king. We need to focus, Galadir interrupted. Time is the proverbial essence. He's right, Torgrith added. We got to get to Caldir, and we need to protect him in the process. He looked a thumb at Connell. So if you've ever seen him fight, you might think he don't need our help. Connell frowned and cocked his head to stare at Farrell. Whatever happened to Blaine? Farrell curled a lip into a snarl. I've yet to deal with him. Brody claims ignorance, yet refuses to do anything about it. Who's Blaine? Torgrith asked. My brother-in-law's bastard son, Farrell replied. He set up an ambush to kill him, Connell explained. Didn't quite work out the way he wanted. Galadir reminded them. You can deal with Blaine later. Farrell slid a caustic glance at him, then relaxed, admitting to himself that he would deal with Blaine and Brody in his own terms. Maybe even get Connell to help. I will go with you. We were hoping you would say that, Torgrith grinned. We'll leave first thing in the morning, Brack announced. We'll need a safe place to spend the night. You will stay here, Farrell grandly offered, crossing the floor to open the door and curl his fingers at his steward. Prepare lodgings for our guests, and 4 more places for the evening meal. Yes, my lord. Arnell dipped his head, hiding his dislike of Connell. I need to check on my friends, Connell stated. They're staying at the Stag's Head, the steward answered with an overt tone of condescension. And where might that be? Connell ignored the man's conceit. I can have one of the servants show you, he replied without looking at him. How about I come with you, Torgrith said to Connell. Good idea, Briac nodded. Galadir and I can further enlighten Lord Farrell. Stepping out into the hallway, the steward addressed one of the servants, a young man in his early teens. Ignoring the 2 visitors, he commanded, show these 2 where the Stag's Head is. Yes, Steward Arnell. The teen reverently dipped his head. Turning his back to Connell, the steward felt a sudden vice grip on his neck, and he was physically lifted off the ground. The next time I come in here, Connell growled, I expect to be treated with respect. Do you understand? Arnell flailed as he felt the grip tighten and finally squeaked, yes. Connell released his grip and the steward dropped to the floor and stumbled forward. Turning his back to him, Connell motioned the servant to lead the way, leaving Arnold gasping for breath. The Stag's Head was a large, respectable tavern 2 streets away from Farrell's castle. When Connell and Torgrith entered, Maldwick and the company had spread out and positioned themselves in strategic locations so they could monitor who entered the tavern, who went upstairs with one of the girls, and who worked the tables, as well as keeping an eye on the taverner. Seeing his deputy, Connell scooted the edges of the other tables before pulling out a chair at Maldwick's table. Torgrith ignored the not-so-subtle looks and yanked a chair out to sit next to Connell. Think they'd never seen a dwarf before, he groused. Connell leaned back and gazed around the room, meeting the eyes of those 2 curious who quickly turned away. Shifting his attention back to Maldwick, he asked, find out anything? Nothing yet, boss. Maldwick stopped as he frowned and narrowed his gaze at 2 men who slipped in through the front door. With a satisfied nod, he caught the attention of 2 attractive members of the company and ticked his head at the newcomers. Immediately understanding, the 2 women got up from their table and started edging their way over to where the 2 men sat at a table near the far wall. Connell nonchalantly leaned back, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering briefly on the 2 men. He recognized the one. Leaning forward, he lowered his voice. Let me know what you find out. See how many others there are. You stayed in the night at Farrell's, boss? Yes. He and I still have a lot more to discuss. We leave first thing in the morning. We'll be ready. You do realize when they see me leaving, they're going to know something's up, Torgoth pointed out, scooting his chair back. Malvik shot a glance over the two women who were amiably chatting with the two newcomers, whose rapt attention was focused nowhere else. He motioned to another company man, a stout man with full beard, who came to the table. Escort our dwarf friend to the door. Let me know if you find anything else. Otherwise, I'll see you in the morning. Connell stood, and together with the stout man, they blocked the view of the newcomers as they escorted Torgoth out the door. Once outside, Connell scanned the streets, noting the usual bustle of merchants returning home, revelers heading to another pub, and street urchins darting in and out among the crowd, begging for coins or racing away after failing to snatch a man's purse. What surprised him was the absence of soldiers or other security until he noticed a man standing near the street corner, pretending to be waiting for someone, a nondescript man who took more than a passing interest in them. Catching the man's eye, he gave him a half smile before he crossed the street to head towards Farrell's castle. The man immediately gave a pretense and openly followed them. Connell slowed his pace, causing the man to likewise slow his pursuit. Abruptly turning the corner, he grabbed Torgoth and shoved him against the building wall, placing a finger to his lips before sticking a foot out just as the man raced around the corner to catch up. The man sprawled headlong onto the street. Connell was on him before he had a chance to react, reaching under his armpit and jerking him to standing. Looking for me? The man squinted at him, his eyes momentarily glassy as though having imbibed too much. A moment later, they cleared. No, he stammered. I thought you were someone else. My apologies. An honest mistake. So sorry to have troubled you. He tried to escape Connell's grip, but Connell's grip was too strong. You're hurting me, he whimpered as he squirmed. You were following me when I came into this city, Connell said, smiling with only his lips. Why? I thought you were someone else, honest. In one quick motion, the man lifted a knee up and pulled a stiletto out from his boot, but Torgoth's hand was quicker, and the dwarf's grip, firm from years of carving stone, grasped the man's wrist with such strength that the stiletto dropped from his hand. Now that wasn't nice, Connell chided, looking down at the blade. And here I thought we were going to be such best friends. Connell's other hand went for the man's throat, and the man started gasping, feeling suddenly weak as Connell squeezed the carotid arteries. I'll ask you one last time. Why were you following me? The man's eyes bulged as he struggled to pry Connell's fingers from his throat. Not you, he rasped. Who? Other man, he slurred. Connell felt him weakening, and he relaxed his grip. Why? Gasping for breath, the man stared defiant eyes at him. He knows why. Tell me. He knows why. Boss, Maldo called out, coming around the corner. Need help? He had two others from the company with him, a man and a woman. Just trying to determine why he was following us. He released the grip on the man's throat. Maldo scrutinized the man, narrowing his gaze at him. You got some friends of yours in the Stag's Head. The man swallowed and nodded. Maldo rolled his eyes and shook his head, letting out a huff of exasperation. He's one of them. Them? Torgoth repeated. They're dragon hunters, Maldo scoffed. Dragon hunters? Connell pushed the man away from him. By the gods, you idiot. He jabbed a finger into the man's chest. You tell those clowns, if I see any of you fools following us or interfering with us, I will track you down and rip your throats out myself. The man's hands went to his throat, and before anyone else could stop him, he scampered off like a frightened rabbit. What is wrong with people? Connell snarled. I know, Maldo chuckled. Keep an eye out, Connell said. If they get in the way, we take them out. Why? Maldo asked, surprised. They're harmless. Connell remembered the fight in the forest clearing when Crag escaped just in time. I don't want them tailing us or compromising us, he explained. We don't need their crazy notions. You know as well as I do that crazy people are unpredictable. You're so right, boss. Had an aunt once who was crazier than a cross-eyed smithy. Don't know what happened to her. but I always kept my distance. Connell grinned and placed a hand on his shoulder. Once we get things better settled, I'll bring you to the planning sessions. Right now, I'm having to flatter and grovel more than I can stand. Maldrick laughed. I understand, boss. We'll be ready. I know you will. That's why, as of this moment, the company is yours. Startled, Maldrick's chest puffed out. Have you, boss? I won't let you down. I know. See you tomorrow morning. Right, boss. There were guards at the gate when Connell and Torgreth approached Farrell's castle. Upon seeing Connell, they snapped to attention. Good evening, sir, one guard said, staring directly at Connell, causing him to wonder at the overly polite and respectful greeting. Good evening, Connell replied. What? No good evening for me? Torgreth quipped. The guard sputtered and swallowed. Yes, good evening. That's more like it, Torgreth smirked. They found Briac and Galadier still in the great hall with Farrell. Farrell looked up when they entered. Upon seeing Connell, he crossed the floor to greet him. I believe I owe you many apologies, my lord. Caught off guard at the change, Connell shot a look at Briac, who nodded that all was well. None needed, Lord Farrell. Neither of us knew. However, that was then. We need to convince Galadier to help us. Lord Farrell has offered half his army for our cause, Galadier said. Half? That's very generous. I believe it is necessary, Farrell said with an air of self-importance. We'd have to get used to treating this youngster with respect, awkward as it might prove to be. My army commander should be here any moment. Thank you, Connell replied as regally as possible. Briac, might I have a word with you? Briac frowned with a quizzical look, then joined Connell as he walked to the corner of the large hall. Your arm, Connell said. Briac cast a surreptitious glance to where Farrell and Galadier chatted before turning back to Connell. He lowered his voice and pointed to his forearm. It glows, and I can feel a slight burn. Those who followed us are dragon hunters. But then, you already knew that, didn't you? Connell challenged. Yes. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Like last time, they knew you were there. I don't know how, Briac answered through gritted teeth, but that's not entirely true. Connell said nothing, waiting for him to continue. No doubt all the hunters are rune marked. My guess is that they're rune marked to Torian or one of his wizards. He locked Connell with a hard, cold stare. They must receive no mercy, for they never go away. So you're saying, yes, Briac added with a curt nod, when we find them, we must kill them.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, that's it for this week. So make sure you subscribe and keep your eyes peeled for next week's video. See you, everyone.